Hi guys, my name is Borrodante, and welcome back to Overpain. So I've had a little bit of a break after that Overpain month, and before we start, a little announcement. I pretty much can't guarantee anymore that I will overpain every submission, so I'm gonna be just jumping back and forth between the submissions and choosing the one that fits the today's episode or something like that. There's just too much submissions, I can't do anything about it, and the more videos I make, the more submissions there is, so there's no point in trying to fight this. So generally, something that most people thought initially about this is that submitting an artwork to Overpain doesn't guarantee that it will be overpained. Now this is true. I used to try to overpaint every single submission, now I just can't do it. So I decided to just go ahead and overpaint something from the new submissions, and here's the one from February 24th, so we're almost at the spring. The submission from Denis Sarazin. So weird to pronounce Russian names with English accent. Denis Sarazin. And his submission of this pretty awesomely looking tribal woman that is slightly a monster. I don't know how else to describe this. Hi, sorry to add yet another one to your existing long list. Don't bother. When you can, could you do an overpaint and help me understand what I need to do in order to bring this up to a more professional or appealing level, because I'm not sure what I should do or learn next. I normally have a good idea what's wrong with the stuff that I do, so I don't bother submitting them, but in this case, I'm not sure where to go with it, and it would be very helpful to me to get your thoughts and suggestions. The challenge had been to do a demon medic shaman set in prehistoric times. Thanks again. Okay, cool. So this is a tribal woman from actually the Stone Age or something like that. Not sure if that's gonna change anything, but I guess it brings a little bit of a deeper image in my head. So the first thing I want to say, like, if we're talking about pushing this further, first of all, really cool looking. I love the way the character looks like. Let's actually open it in here and upscale it to 5K. So yeah, one thing that I'm seeing here that it may be a problem, not a problem, like one thing that, yeah, this is the area where we should push further now, is the detail of the surface. Detail of the small shadows. How to switch from this big, low detail shapes to actually start visualizing the skin, small areas where the bones touch the skin. Just this area, like, it feels really blank, even though like there's nothing wrong with it. It's not the realistic level of detail on the surface of this character. Pretty much everywhere. Of course, there's a bunch of little things that I would change as well, like generally the values of the lighting are a bit off, or not really off, but like I would surge them a bit more to have a bit more of a realistic lighting. Not to mention that there's barely any shading on the skull right here. Also, actually on Patreon in the comments someone said that there should be this laugh line, and generally I will search the other areas of anatomy that would really work better, like the chin line should really continue a bit more, pretty much up to the ear. But those are little things that will be fixed with just practicing and learning anatomy, whatever. Main thing that, like the main step to do to improve your skill from this point is really pretty much studying photographs. Literally, I have right here opened a picture of some sort of a tribal woman. Let's actually send it. And this is a very important thing. Of course, she is a very old lady, so she has a bunch of very convenient kind of details on the surface, but this is not the kind of details that I'm talking about. Really, the details of the shadow will bring a lot more feeling that we can see this surface and it's actually in front of us, that it's real. Right here, when I'm looking at this shoulder, at these bones right here and here as well, like pretty much all over the place, I look at it like I can see what it means, but there's no way I can touch it. Like, it doesn't feel tactile. There is not enough of that, like, surface level tiny details that would really support the geometry that this shoulder or neck or head is trying to bring the message of. Everything is too smooth, like a 3D model that doesn't have enough details in the actual surface of it. So for that, we need to really start thinking on the different level of scale. Like, we start to think, Like, imagine that this bone would be just one painting of this bone piercing through the skin. How would you paint it if it would be just this and nothing else? This is not how you would leave it, right? There should be more details, like we would show how the skin is actually hugging over the bone when it's going under the skin. We would see these values on a much smaller scale. And I would just continue adding details in this sense. Like I would start thinking on that scale, zooming in and thinking, okay, this is a shoulder. It has the top plane over here, and then it goes lower. So this is how I'm adding it. And you see, I just added these tiny strokes all over the place. You can already see how this area is a lot more tactile looking. Like, I can almost see how I could touch it. It's much more defined as just a piece of surface. This is a really important thing. And I haven't even added a bunch of shadows from the bones, like little shadows falling on the skin right here. And this is what we need the reference photo right here for. Just look how shadows fall onto the surface and smaller details, like on the countless amount of necklaces on her chest. We can see the soft yet close, very tiny shadow that becomes really big and soft, or really sharp and small in some areas. And this difference in the scale of the shadow really sends us a very clear message of how close or far away the tiny detail is from the skin. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna repeat this effect right here on this tiny bone just to demonstrate, and then I'll actually do the whole time-lapse thing to work all over the place, and we'll talk about it more. But generally I would start right here. It would be a really tiny shadow. First of all, it would be darker, more saturated too, why not? Also a bit more red. So really tiny shadow right here, because in this area the bone is pressed really closely to the skin. A very small distance, so not a lot of space for the shadow to spread and become soft. And then right here I would imagine that this would be like the distance between the bone and the skin. In here it was much shorter, pretty much almost no distance. Now the shadow sends us a lot of message that something we didn't know before, if this was the case or not. Like, was this bone actually sticking out like this, or was it kind of like hugging the skin, pressing really closely to it? We don't know, we couldn't see it, because the shadow would be one thing that would explain that to us. If I would paint the shadow like this would mean that this bone is actually like a piece of gum is just pressed to the surface of the skin and actually repeating it. A very different object, very different behavior of it in the 3D space. So this kind of shadows is really important to fully define what we actually see in these details. And when we go through the whole character this way, this is a good stage to start doing this. When we'll go through the whole character, we'll see how it's actually already on the next level. Artistically and just definition-wise, it's gonna be much more impressive. And of course, for that, we need to know the anatomy more and more. Each time we improve the level of detail, we should think about how exactly the anatomy of all these muscles go. I know that from the ear, there would be a muscle going like this, then somewhere there would be a clavicle, and I'll think all of this through while I'll be painting, and that will be also defined with these kind of like smaller scale strokes that will naturally bring that surface texture that will make it look a lot more tactile and real. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for the beginning, and now I'll go through the whole painting, define the values a bit differently maybe, and of course add a lot more definition to the surface by mostly adding smaller scale shadows. The main theme of this episode, I suppose. So let's start. so this is what I have so far. Haven't really looked up any references for the skull, and we really need it because I'm not sure how exactly to define the shape of it. And when you're shading, you really need to know the shape, because every little spot of it needs to have a certain brightness, and for that I need to know at which angle it turns from the light source, so you really need to know the surface. So yeah, as you can see, the main thing about pushing the definition of the character further is actually working with these sort of a ghosty strokes. And for that, you need to have your flow of the brush really low. Low flow allows you to work with a very smooth, soft stroke. Therefore, you're kind of able to work in between the brush strokes, like increasing the definition of what you're painting with. I wouldn't be able to define such a complex shape of these hair strings, and the shape of this earring, and the shape of this ear. Let me undo this before I forget, because that would be a disaster. But yeah, as you can see, all these complex shapes, they never have like a solid silhouette or anything. It's always like, you can see it was a stroke like this, there was like this. There's a whole bunch of strokes with very soft edges, like ghosty edges, which is something you can achieve using a very low flow of your brush. Now, you need to switch to this kind of mode of low flow when you define details like this already, when you need to think about a very complex, tiny objects, little details, little deviations of the surface. A little rim light right here really worked well, and I thought of it while I was defining all the tiny geometry very precisely with this transparent brush. And this is where you get all these good non-verbal ideas of how to improve the picture, because when you're defining with a relatively small brush on a small scale of details, your brain starts to think on this small scale of detail, and you start to understand the surface of what you're painting much better. So instead of using just a whole bunch of really soft, smooth strokes like this, I switched to these tiny strokes, and they weren't hard to work with because of this low flow. They blend into the picture really well, even though they're small, while the whole surface of the object is very smooth. It feels like it was almost impossible to add something on such a smooth, perfect surface of the shoulder, but I just went ahead and added some details, and it looked fine, just because the strokes aren't that sharp. So this is a good little trick. Make sure you use a low enough flow of your brush. Yeah, also I decided to get rid of this symbol on the character here and here, because while I was painting, Nadia came into the room and said that this is a horrible thing to use this symbol, that it has nothing to do with any kind of tribal situation. This is like ancient Greece medicine symbol, I guess, or something like that. Like, it has nothing to do with the tribal character. So I don't know, Dennis, what you meant by this symbol, but I just changed it because whatever. I feel like it fits in better to have some kind of simpler shapes, you know, as they used to be back then. On a character that's wearing actual like bones of some animal, the symbols should be also relatively simple, you know. So yeah, I'm gonna do the same kind of symbol over here as it used to be in the original. So yeah, generally, if we talk about on a simpler language, the best way to push this character further is to add the smallest shadows from everything. Pretty much nothing here had shadows. The bones hanging from the hat, the hairs are not casting any shadow on the face, any of the bones or the necklace don't have any shadows, you know, this kind of stuff. When you just add it, you start to fill in your character with the basic details that you will be able to push from further to define its geometry better, no matter what it is. So that's what I'm doing pretty much everywhere. I'm just adding shadows. I can't even like precisely tell you what is making the character better, but yeah, I'm changing the brushwork to something much smoother, much more detailed, much more nuanced because of these semi-transparent strokes I'm doing. So now I'm gonna look up a goat skull, I suppose. Yeah, we need an actual photograph. Yeah, this is a good reference, I think. Soft yet high contrast lighting, revealing the shape really well. The angle is correct, we can see everything we need to be seeing. It's probably actually some kind of a decoration, like this is not an actual skull, so not the perfect reference, but good enough for our purposes, I think. I'm just gonna make some of the details a bit sharper because they look a bit smooth because this is like a figure. But the main shape and the angle, the geometry, is exactly what we need, so I think I'm gonna use this and that will be good enough. So yeah, now we can really see how the side plane should be much darker, all of it, except for this one bridge over here under the eyeball. And there's no need to do super dark area right here because there's no actual deep hole in here. There should be a bottom plane. And that's pretty much the main thing that I needed to see, so let's continue working on this. Also, one thing that I've just thought about, we should probably make the highlights in the eye a bit less perfect because that rectangle that was before looked a bit like a studio lighting. So yeah, I'm just gonna continue doing what I've just said and we'll see the result. I think it's gonna look pretty cool. The soft brush is really a huge game changer. I just had it on this way when I started the episode because this is how I finished painting the SCP-682, the previous episode. So this was a good, almost like a discovery. I kind of knew it, but you know, you have to constantly remind yourself about this kind of nuances. So yeah, I'm gonna work more on the shadows from tiny details and on the horns on the skull, mostly these details. So let's continue. Okay, I guess this will be it. So I did a little change from what I was talking about a moment ago. I was lighting up this skull, obviously not from the top as I was talking about it. It was more like this angle, maybe like even a bit more. Almost like just from the camera point of view, like from here, because this is the direction of the light on the rest of the body as well. There's also a bit more lighting from the top, but it's like a secondary light, just a soft skylight or something like that. So there's a lot of soft light sources on this character, pretty much. So yes, you can see I pretty much haven't really added a single detail to the painting. I just changed what already was visualized. I just worked through the surfaces, searching for a very precise positioning of the values, making sure that I defined them exactly how they're supposed to go comparing to the light source, without simplifying anything. So the more you go into this with a semi-transparent small brush, the more tactile and realistic the surfaces become, and you sort of even get this like a texture, right? It looks like there's some kind of subtle texture to the surface. You can see slight deviations here and there, like sort of a handmade strokes sometimes don't perfectly follow the overall direction of the surface, and that's pretty much what makes this whole texture appearance. So yeah, really, to push your artwork further, you just have to think with a much more precise lighting. It can go completely precise as far as you can do it. And I'm not just talking about shadows, I'm talking about the values on the surfaces. So the moment you define all the details of the lighting on the objects, you will see how there is more than enough detail on the character without the need to add a lot of wrinkles or little details that are not necessarily supposed to be there. Not talking specifically about this picture, this one doesn't really have that, except for maybe these very random highlights all over the hair, because I assume it was hard to imagine how to define this hair otherwise. Again, if you just define the lighting perfectly precisely, you won't need to add any kind of meaningless details on top. You will already have more than enough of the definition and like a natural texture that appears from just your strokes. And of course, as always, I will remind you guys that the best way to learn how exactly these shadows fall, how exactly the values go on any kind of surface, the best way to learn this is to study from photographs or from actual objects in reality, which is something I never done myself, so not gonna say I recommend because I never even tried that. But yeah, studying from what real objects look like in photographs is definitely a way to improve. But pay as much attention as you can to how exactly lighting works in smallest details and in big scales overall as well. On all levels of definition, how lighting works. That's the main thing you should be studying to be able to paint pretty much anything. You know, if you have a wrong anatomy, it doesn't mean you can't have a good painting of this wrong anatomy. It would be just some kind of anatomical anomaly, but it can be painted well, you know? There's never a reason to not try to improve your understanding of lighting, because it goes as complex as you can possibly push it. So yeah, this is it. Tell me guys what you think about the results. If you want to submit your own artwork for Overpaint, the link to my Patreon page is in the end of this video, and I thank you for watching if you did. I guess you did if you're here. Leave a like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Work softly. Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Look at that ear. I spent like 20% of the time working on this ear. I like ears.